any much further ado, let's bring up this fantastic group of showrunners that we have with us today, starting with Vince Gilligan of Breaking Bad. Come on up. Julian Fellows of Downton Abbey. Bo Willimon from House of Cards. And Matthew Weiner from Mad Men. You know, we recently, my colleague Brian Lowry, who will be here later, recently did a really fantastic piece looking at the 20-year anniversary of the premiere of NYPD Blue, a show that, you know, made waves and made real impact in its day. And when we were putting that story together, it really struck me how much the nature of television has changed. People loved NYPD Blue. People loved The X-Files. People loved The Sopranos. But nowadays, people obsess over television. They absolutely, there is the megaphone of social media has made the ability for everyone who has an opinion to sound off, to write a recap, to praise, to criticize. What does that do? What is this incredible chorus of commentary out there 24/7 about television? Does it influence you all as creators? Is it something you pay attention to? Is it something you think about as you're developing stories and plot twists and things like that?
I think people are always obsessed, actually. The difference is they didn't have an outlet for it.
The megaphone.
Now they can make a TV show on the internet about their own obsession. But I think obsession is part of providing entertainment, the artificial relationship between the audience and the characters or whatever it is, so that in the end they know them better than you do. He would never have done that, you know, and you think, I invented him, he does what I say. But I think it is dangerous to get drawn into it. I mean, I steer clear of all that stuff, partly because I think it's better, but partly because I can't work it. So I'm completely incapable of getting onto any of those sites. My son every now and then passes on really abusive stuff, but the ordinary stuff just goes past.
Vince, there's been no shortage of Breaking Bad commentary the last couple of weeks since you've been, you know, marching towards your conclusion. Do you read it? Can you remotely follow all of it?
I have to second what Julian said. Although I am better with the computer. I'm very good at accessing pornography with it, but other than that, I think it is for me at least it is more emotionally wise to steer clear of the at this point in time wonderful, admittedly, you know, amazingly wonderful reaction. So I hear anecdotally, you know, for Breaking Bad. And I'm very pleased that is going on, but I actually steer clear of looking it up on the computer because it seems to me to be human nature that you could have 1,000 good things said about you, but all you seem to remember, at least that's the case for me, is the 1 or 2 or 10 bad things. And even if you're lucky that it's really good stuff, still it's a rabbit hole you can disappear down for many hours on end looking up your show on the internet.
And when you kill a character, oh, blimey, then you know what it's like to be accused of being a serial killer. It's unbelievable.
Matt?
Well, I was going to say, I have 2 older sisters, and I cannot imagine anything more obsessive than their relationship with the Partridge Family when I was growing up. And there was no outlet, but I mean, you know, every woman I dated in college had a picture of Marilyn Monroe or Mel Gibson or whatever on the wall. And I mean, people's relationship with entertainment that's what you want. You want them to be obsessed. You want to provide that outlet. The constant conversation and the variety of the conversation and the personality of some of the people who are involved in this you can see a window into tremendous loneliness and also, you know, sometimes intellectual, you know, rigor. So I personally have sworn off it. I'm a former addict, and it just was completely destructive for me, especially because my relationship with the audience as a storyteller, you're telling a bedtime story, and it's not to infantilize them. It's just like I think what they like often better than what they do. If they see something they like, they will write 8 billion times how much they want more of it, and then you will give them more of it, and they will say, like, this is boring, how come he keeps doing that? You can't, your instincts are so much better at, like, what bores you and what interests you and so forth, and the ownership, you cannot, I've reached a point where, like anybody who writes for a living, where you realize you do not have control over what people think about what you do or what they get out of it, and so why, it will affect your work if you try and go chase that. It's completely.
It does seep in.
No, it can and it will if you let it, and you really shouldn't. It's not good for the show.
Bo, what was it like for you? You've been a playwright, but House of Cards was a larger stage for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, in terms of your first question, I do engage in that stuff to a degree. I mean, I think you have to be aware of any, form of criticism, professional or amateur, sort of like porn, actually, and like porn, all things in moderation, and and I think what's incredible about the last decade is that anyone doing anything, whether it's a TV show or a play or a film or what have you, can communicate directly with their viewers, their audience. And if you take that for what it's worth, it can be really enlightening. I mean, you never want to pander. You never want to let that be your guiding light. But you do learn things. If something's not clear or someone didn't follow something or there's, visceral reactions upon whatever fraction of humanity it is that is active on that stuff, that's something that you can, absorb and do with it as you will. I mean, I think there's the Woody Allen quote he probably stole it from someone that, when it's bad, it hurts, and when it's good, it's never good enough. So, you have to approach it with that armor. But to have this sort of engagement with the audience is, it's new. It's never been achievable before to this degree, and I think it's great.
Interesting. How about, of course, there's many new ways that people are watching television, including, a clear trend toward people watching 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes more at a time. Does that at all affect your thinking in terms of plotting and pacing and the way you tell stories? That the idea that people might watch it 2 and 3 and 4 episodes at a time in a way that they didn't 5 years ago?
Again, something out of your control. I mean, I watch things that way sometimes. When I'm out of work, I can watch things that, I was talking about trying to watch all the Mad Men's before I went back to start the final season, and I was like, it's 78 hours. It's like, I could take a vacation or I could watch the show, and it's not a vacation. So, but I like every episode. I mean, it depends on your show. I like every episode to be its own movie, and then to have an arc over 13 episodes. I think it can release some pressure on the ends of those episodes, necessarily. Like something like The Wire, just watching it in hindsight, The Wire didn't really have those individual episode things. So when you watch that all together like that, you really feel like you're not even in chapters, you're in one long story. So it depends on your show, Again, you have no control over it. I think everybody here would agree, anything that makes people watch the show, and especially if you have there was a time when serialized drama was actually being phased out because the syndication model didn't support it. How are you going to watch one episode of Mad Men when you come home that one night at 11 o'clock on some channel if you don't know the story? And so anything that encourages people to keep up or get caught up or, live in the world of the show is very good for more of the show.
We never refer really to our episodes as episodes. I mean, we call them chapters, and they're all roughly around the same length, more because we think of it like a novel. You can pick it up, put it down, read 3 chapters at once.
Right. Of course, you came out all at once with your...
Yeah. But I'd like to experiment with sort of dispensing with the idea of episodes altogether, of extremely variable length, everything from like 10 minutes to 120 minutes, the same sort of hours. But not really sticking to the hour model. And ultimately, I would much prefer just to dispense with any demarcation whatsoever. I mean, just to have 13 hours and the audience chooses when they want to stop or start again. I mean, right now the technology doesn't quite support that, nor does the international market, where even a show like ours that streams still needs to be broadcast in many places around the globe in the hour-long format with commercials. But I think that as the technology shifts over the next 5 years, you'll see a great deal of experimentation in terms of what constitutes a television show, where the narrative will start to dictate the form as opposed to the reverse.
Interesting. Julian, you have a lot of varying running times in Downton.
Yes, I mean, I think we all have to stay reasonably loose because the way of seeing television is changing all the time now. And, you know, playbacks and Sky and this and that and the other. I mean, there's a whole generation for whom the time that the program is shown means no more than the release date of a movie. It just means after that time they can watch the show. But they don't feel any obligation. But every now and then you get something, and I think both Mad Men and Downton got it, when there was a kind of wish to watch it at the same time as everyone else watched it, so you could gather around the water cooler the following day and discuss, you know, how the show got it wrong. And so there's quite a strong part of that. But I agree with Matthew, I'm afraid, and probably because I'm an old fart, really. But in the end, I think each show, each episode, each chapter, whatever word you give it, has to be a kind of movie in itself that is satisfactory to watch. You have some stories that arch right through a series. You know, will they or won't they get off with each other or whatever it is. But within the exact dramatic model, you must have a kind of satisfactory watch in each episode. And if you watch them together, great. And if you watch them individually, then that works too. I think the problem of concentrating on the idea of someone watching 6 episodes at a time is then when you break it into 6 chunks, you know, there's always a danger that it won't quite work as an individual piece. So I think, you know, I would agree with Matthew, really. I think each episode has to work in and for itself.
Can you talk about the overall story arcing process? I have to believe that that's one of the most sort of creatively stimulating processes when you start out at the beginning of a season. And can you talk about
I think this goes back to just what Julian was talking about, and certainly, you know, the drama, and it's Bo may be right, and you know that I'm all for anything that's interesting and new, and I think the audience eventually feels that way also, but it's all broken down into increments of what's going to happen. So there's what's going to happen this year, and there's what's going to happen in the next scene. There's what do I know now, and what will I eventually know. And the people who can pull that off, and they're 2 very different skills, actually. You know, you look at Breaking Bad, one of the things I always talk to Vince about that always blows me away about Breaking Bad is that the premise would appear to be so incredibly limited. And what happens in that show and the way the time is stretched out and the way that the tension of what happens in this moment, what's going to happen in the next 15 seconds or right when it blacks out, is very different than what's going to happen to Walter. And so there's the immediate problems and the larger problems. And if you're lucky enough to have more than one character, you get, you know, 20 what's going to happen for that, and hopefully 1 holy shit by the end of the episode. And that's sort of, so I've broken it down into sort of mathematical what's going to happen versus holy shit situation.
And is your thinking in that mathematical equation? But you're thinking because your training is so much in 48-minute increments on the it's an intriguing idea of 10 minutes to 120 minutes, but is just all your muscles are working toward that.
Well, I mean, our show is 48 minutes. You know, people have to do it on a network, you know, in 42 minutes. Yeah, I don't know, you know, how it works. We always have too much show, and I'm always cutting it down. But we never have enough for 2. Do you know what I mean? When we do a 2-episode Mad Men, it's really 3 episodes that I've cut down to 2. It's just like there's painfully. It's just there's just increments of that. What's interesting to me is that you don't know how much you have metabolized. I think there is an organic structure to this hour of entertainment, in the same way there is to a 90-minute movie or a 110-minute movie.
Or a chapter of
or a novel. I don't see any comparison between novels and TV. I know people do it. I don't. I don't see one as higher than the other, but they don't seem related to me, except for Charles Dickens, who feels like the first TV writer to me. But I always feel like you get a piece of something going, and you just follow where it goes. And in fact, if it's good, you will throw other things out of it to spend the time on that chunk. And you know, one of the things about working The Sopranos is it was so organic. It was complete. David had worked in TV for 30 years, and it was completely related to playing against what the audience expects to happen in a television show. And the subconscious is constantly being rewarded in a show like that because you will follow the story where it goes instead of having to have, you know, the act outs and the formula of, you know, of how it works. I don't know how other people work.
But this was a tremendous development in American television in the 80s and 90s. The whole multi-arc narrative, the end of the single narrative episode, where the whole episode is about whether or not Dr. Kildare is going to save his leg, you know, and finally it's saved, hurrah, and that's the credits. And we've finished with that now. We have all these different stories in different tempos, and I think that's why, although it's always heartbreaking chucking out all the stuff that you've shot and you love, in fact, that seems to me to be part of the process of distillation, to get this kind of tremendously energy-packed episode. And you have different characters servicing different kinds of stories. So one overall arc is, you know, is this man wasting his life? And the other arc is, will Daisy get a new hat for Sunday? And all of these things are kind of platted up with different degrees of intensity. And that, for me, is a form that was nourished here. I mean, in West Wing and ER and in all those shows, they kind of worked that formula up. I mean, I first experienced it when I worked with Robert Altman, who was, again, you know, king of the multi-arc. I mean, that was his thing. And it was an extraordinary training, because I found when I went from that to another job, when it was a straight single narrative linear story, it seemed very dull because nothing was happening. I just kept thinking, God, it's these same two people again. And I realized I'd got into the habit of having all these plates on sticks. But that is, you know, modern television, and that seems to me to be how it works. You jam them all in, you chuck out the stuff that isn't quite tip-top, and in the end you're left with a bowl of kind of electric cream.
I just love that.
Electriccream.com.
There you go. I see it.
That's the kind of stuff I'm looking up. Is there,
You learn something at this every year. I am curious, though, in terms of, you know, Mad Men and Breaking Bad are such intricate, House of Cards, they're such intricately crafted dramas. How, at the start of a season or at the start of a batch of writing episodes, can you just talk about your process? Do you get in a room with your writers and spitball and have a whiteboard? I'm always curious about how this comes
No whiteboard. I hate whiteboards. I have a pet peeve about them. We use cork boards with push pens and index cards, because with your dry erase whiteboard, when you're playing Nerf football in the room and someone goes long and they mash their shoulder against the dry erase board, you ruin all the work you've done that week. Conversely, the cork board is much more durable in that sense, and also allows for a non-linear representation. You can actually move scenes around, but with a dry erase board, you gotta, you know, erase it. And it's much more labor intensive.
These are tips from a master, people. Pay attention.
That's literally all I have left to say.
Bo, can you talk about conceiving House of Cards? You came into it with the 2-season order. Did you and your team think 2 seasons worth, or did you think that first 13?
Yeah, I always knew what the final image of the end of season 2 would be. And I'm writing that episode now, so it's really satisfying to actually be able to put it on paper. We use dry erase cork boards, giant Post-it notes. Those things are amazing. You know, anything we can put our hands on, and then, you know, usually at a certain point in the day, I say, let's move to the other side of the room where we can't even look at any of those things, you know, and stare at our feet and each other's faces and, you know, get real. So I don't know, there's sort of voodoo to it that's, you know, wrapped up in a very rigorous and schematic structure that you have to, you know how much story you have to tell, you know certain things you want to have happen, and you start, it's like I started out as a painter, you have a big blank canvas and you lay in some of the big strokes and outlines, and then you start adding the layers and getting more specific, and it's time to get in on that ear. And then you decide you want it in profile this way instead of that way, and you got to move the ear over here. So I don't know. I mean, it's ultimately the greatest catalyst and decision maker is time. Because we all have our schedules and we all have to deliver. And what's great about that is it forces you to rely on instinct. So while you're putting a great deal of time in a meticulous fashion into formulating what these intricate stories will be, at a certain point you got to call the ball. And then often for us when we're filming, based upon what the actors are doing or what comes up in rehearsal, I'll make major changes on the fly. And I think it's that give and take between what's happening in the moment, instinct, and all of the planning you've put in, if only to toss it out, that makes a television show much more of a living, breathing thing in some ways than other media.
Is that a scary thing to do if you've had that experience where some actors are gelling or something is working and on a dime you decide to shift it?
Well, you don't want to kill anybody you might need.
Yeah.
And you never know what's going to happen. I mean, there's something about when you break. This whole conversation is making me very nervous. Everyone left the word panic out. I'm 5 weeks into the last season of the show, and with the writers, we haven't started shooting yet. And there's this great moment where you come in with all of your ideas, and it is a great moment. It's scary to say them out loud, but I come in with all of my ideas. Then the writers go off. They get a couple days off right after they start work. And to go to the movies and so forth, but they're supposed to come in with 10 ideas each. Then and a lot of conversation from their ideas starts to gel into cards and so forth. And then we start breaking an episode after we've sort of mapped out the entire season. And for me, it's like I don't want to get more than 5 or 6 in, even though you could at that time, you're on a roll, get deeper into it because you don't know what's going to happen when you see it. Someone, especially if you're not on the air. This is an extra thing. You're not on the air for a long time. You'd want to make sure, I had no idea that Bob Benson would be of interest to anyone. He was, he's a great actor, but then we started seeing stuff, and I'm like, oh, this guy is really fascinating. And so there's things like that you want to leave room for. But I don't make changes on the set, so I don't have the stomach for that. But it is a process where you get to the end, and I've always said at the beginning of the season, this is how it's going to end, this is the last image of the season, these are the stories, how they're going to end. And I get there, and I usually have to be, talked into it by other people.
To stick with the original plan?
To stick with what I was going to do. Okay. Because I don't believe in it anymore, and I'm bored of it. And I also, you've told the story so many times that you actually, you feel like you've already done it. And you're like, haven't we done that? That's old. We're doing that again. They're like, we haven't done it. You've just been talking about it for 12 months. And you think you've done it. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure we did that. And then you realize, okay. And then when you actually go through with it, everyone probably has had this experience of there's a scene missing in your work. There's a scene missing, a scene missing, a scene missing. You've skipped over the most important part of the story.
To tie it together.
No, it's usually something for me that is very emotional and going to be very uncomfortable and sometimes dramatic, but personally troublesome. Everybody here, they're here because when they write, there's an athletic. I know, writer, athletic, they don't go in the same sentence. There is a physical experience of that you are devoting yourself when you are writing, and you go through that. You go through what's happening to the characters. And for me, someone always says to me, why didn't you write that scene? I'm like, I didn't want to. And then you do that, and that's the thing, usually the last chunk that comes in. I don't know, it was like ending the show, must have been like that.
Well, it was definitely like that thing you're saying just before the last point, with the thing about you talk about something for many, many months on end, and you feel like you've done it already. I've had that exact same experience you described, where it's like, oh man, this is everyone's seen this. No, they haven't. What are you, schizophrenic? They've just been talking about it in a room for 12 months. You get bored by your own work if you live with it long enough. So.
I think this whole business of talking about plots and stories is quite dangerous anyway, actually, because people can talk away the book they never write and talk away their great idea for a movie that never gets made. I don't have as much opportunity as you do to talk away the stories, because in our writer's room, there's only one man, me. So the opportunities for discussing it are a bit limited. But
I don't think I said anyone else talks.
oh, I see. Just talk to the glass. But I'm always saying, whenever I see a TV movie or anything about writers, they've always got sort of shopping lines with bits of paper and pegs and blackboards and whiteboards, and they go up and they go, arrow, like that, and all this stuff. And I just think, what the hell is all that about? I mean, I
Fine.
just
How
write
do you
down-
procrastinate?
I literally, in this episode, Mrs. Patmore falls in love. That's it. There's no arrow. But of course, I yearn for a writer's room. I'm longing for one.
Do you bounce? I mean, is there anybody at Carnival? Is there anybody that's a sounding board for you? Do you bounce ideas, or?
Well, no, my main sounding board, who is sitting over there, is my good wife. And she tries to take out the bits that really don't work at all. And generally kind of scrape off the nonsense. And then my agent has another attempt to rescue it, and only then does it go to Carnival.
I see.
But, I mean, it seems to work so far because people are watching. There's nothing else, is there, really?
Exactly.
But that's my method.
Gotcha. I'm curious, Vincent. Now, Matt, you're in the same situation where you're going to have a staggered final season. Did you, when you knew you were going to have 16 final episodes to get to where you wanted to be, did you map out all 16, or did you do them 8 and 8?
A lot of people have found it very annoying that we broke them up to 8 and 8, and sort of put the blame at the feet of the network and the studio for doing that in some sense, out of some desire to really milk it out. And the truth is that was my fault, because we are very. It takes a long time to break these episodes. They take about Breaking Bad. They take about 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks on average, just to break them. That's not the writing that proceeds. To break them, to structure them, to all 7 of us in the room working together, putting all the brains on the one episode, as it were, and figuring it out index card by index card and plot beat by plot beat, and that is the least fun part of the job and also the hardest part of the job, but also the most important part of the job. And because these things take so long historically to break, on average, like I say, 3 weeks, we knew mathematically we didn't have enough time to get them all 16 figured out before we needed them to start airing in summer of this year. So the network and the studio, the network very kindly let us break them in half, and caught a bit of heat for it, which was unfair to them. Like I say, it was they were helping me out. It was not an effort to make people wait longer or gin up interest artificially. It was just I needed the time.
Yeah, gotcha. Now, Bo has said he knew what the final moment of the end of the season 2 was, and Matt, I know you've said you knew where your story would ultimately.
You have to take my word for it.
And I'm taking it on faith. Vince, did you have an idea at the beginning? You know, I know it's Mr. Chips to Scarface, but did you have an idea at the beginning where Walter White was going to end up?
You know, I probably did have ideas, but I forget so much. I'm not even being funny. I probably had ideas early on where the whole thing was going to go, but that was that rare moment in time, the one moment in the life of the series when I was working by myself, and I am amazed by the way you do it. My hat is off to you. It's very impressive to create a show, to write a show all by oneself. I found that I enjoyed the writer's room process so much. I had 6 excellent writers who gave so much value added to the show and created so much nuance and so many, not just nuance, not just the little details, but the big ones. So all of that having been said, whatever idea I had in the early going of where the show should head, where it should ultimately wind up, I've since forgotten because it was replaced by better ideas that were the result of the collaborative group effort of working with these writers.
The show changes you. And because the actors do things, you invent a character thinking, oh, well, they'll do for an episode or two. And then suddenly something really interesting and good comes out of the performance and they become one of the main people at the center of it. The whole thing is very organic. And I don't think at the beginning you sort of should know where you're going, really. You've got to give it a little bit of room to breathe. I mean, towards the end, you know, you do sort of slightly know who's going to be happy and who's going to get it in the neck. But that's about it, I think.
With everything that you all have going on as showrunners, how involved are you in the whole intricate business of marketing your shows? Picking the key art for the poster, picking the 30 seconds that is released on the internet as a teaser. I mean, is that something that you guys are actively hands-on involved with?
Not me. I mean, occasionally they'll show you a bit and say, you know, we're thinking that this might be a teaser for the 3rd series or whatever it is. And you say, well, if you tell them who the murderer is now, there's not much reason to watch the whole series. And at that moment, they may listen to you, but they're not sort of obliged to. It's really all of that's a different department.
I have a very close collaboration with Linda Schupak at AMC, who's in charge of marketing, and you know, with everybody there. In fact, I pitch the season arc to Linda sometimes before I pitch it to the writers. Wow. And because she's super smart, and she loves the show, and she has good ideas, and I know that it's like actually on the way. I mean, this is the thing about talking about something. It's on the way to becoming something. And so we try and get the key art and all those other things organically out of whatever that big theme is, because I will forget it by the end of the season. I will forget it before we launch. And for someone who's not trying to tell the actual details of what happens in the show, you really need like a big concept every season. And she's just, you know, she and her team and the network have been extremely, actually kind of bold about how they've done it from the beginning. The poster for the 1st season is just the font, just using Helvetica. There's something completely counterintuitive about the entire success of the show, and I attribute it to her and to the network's boldness and to our relationship.
I need to second. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I need to second that. Linda's great. Of course, we work with her too in Breaking Bad. They're both AMC shows, and really just. You know, it's an honor to get included in these conversations, and great lady, great team. Sorry.
Well, Fincher does all of the key visuals. I mean, he of course created iconic commercials and continues to do so. So his marketing sensibility is extraordinary. And when you have one of the best directors in the world who's willing to film things or shoot stills, you know, you want to exploit that. And when there's copy to be written, I write it. But we're in constant communication with Netflix about that. I mean, they have a great marketing team, and it's very collaborative. And you know, but you know, we care about, David and I really care about every detail of the show, and what you put out to the world reflects on the show, from you know, marketing to what the cover of your box set looks like to you know, even a 2-line description that's going to show up you know, on the Netflix website. And Netflix cares about all that stuff just as much as we do. So it's a great partnership.
That's great. Well, my God, we could go on, but thank you so much again for giving us your time.